Welcome back to another episode of All Patched Up. That's the series where I go back and look at games that have, well, it's a bit self-explanatory really, isn't it? And we've got some nice ones to look at today. I've gone back through the games and tried to compare the performance from when they first came out, with a few side-by-sides as well, so hopefully you can see exactly what's changed. I think it's important to give developers a second chance. I know it's annoying when games come out and they're in a terrible state, but there are also times when they're just adding new features or fixing bugs, or even just changing the gameplay mechanics slightly. With all of that said, if you do enjoy this content, then press all the buttons, flick all the switches, and save yourself money when you buy your eShop credit using SwitchUp.gg, where you can essentially earn double your normal gold tokens because we have our SwitchUp tokens, and it supports us a little bit when you do so. Alright, what games have been patched up this week then? Well, let's find out. Let's start off with Figment 2. This had some serious performance issues when it launched. We didn't actually review it on the channel, but we did cover it in one of our interesting games episodes, and it was more than a little stuttery. It's now up to version 1.0.7, and that includes a number of fixes for soft locks. There are a couple of game-breaking bugs, like things not turning up during chase sequences, and you could also run past the very first boss. You could just sprint straight through him. There are a few visual tweaks and changes to the overall aesthetic, and work has been done on the textures. As you can see, performance isn't perfect, but it does seem to be able to maintain 30 frames per second, at least a little more consistently. You will still see those quite significant stutters that, although sporadic, stand out against what's otherwise quite good performance. Image quality is solid, and 7 patches later, Figment is looking quite nice. Then we've got Wildfrost, which is a ridiculously addictive deck builder that has that lovely aesthetic art style that's almost cutesy and gross at times with high blood splatter, and it works perfectly. Now, Wildfrost, performance-wise, is absolutely fine, and it was at launch, but there were a number of bugs and glitches. Things like recycle cards not being playable, that's now been fixed. If you arrived at the last boss with certain characters, it would glitch out there, and they've fixed that as well. I think I experienced one crash when I was reviewing it, and since the patch I haven't experienced any. That's not to say it's not going to crash again, as we all know how sporadic those things can be, but it is nice to see that there have been a number of fixes to errors and glitches. I mentioned it in the review, there was also some missing audio in places, but it looks like they've also patched that up as well, so that's good. Now, I did have a few visual issues with cards covering up what's on screen. So for example, you can lift up a card to look at it, but it would block the enemy's own statistics, which is a bit of a problem when you're trying to work out what to use. I think that's still an issue and maybe something they want to look at tweaking, but performance-wise, it's absolutely perfect. It really does run well. Again, full list of all the changes is in the description. I absolutely love the Atelier series, especially the Ryza series. They really do know how to make a compelling game, and this was the third and final one in the trilogy, so yeah, I was doubly excited. Now I have to say I wasn't overly impressed with performance at launch. It had a performance mode which seemed to be back to front, so when you changed it to quality it got worse than performance mode, and there's a quite significant amount of popping across the board. Now with this one, I think we should do a direct comparison side by side, because it's one of those where it's very difficult to tell even when you're flicking backwards and forwards to see if there have been any significant changes. If we look at the frame rate of the performance mode, and then we look at the exact same area with the quality mode, well, I think the same things really apply. It's that the performance and quality modes don't make a huge amount of difference. I will say quality seems to be using more anti-aliasing, and while that leads to less jaggy edges on some of the tertiary items within a scene, it does make the whole image look a little more blurry, which is obviously a product of that post-processed anti-aliasing. Perhaps resolution's slightly higher. What do we reckon? Having run through a few areas, what I have noticed is there's less jitter. The frame pacing was quite jittery before, and it's definitely better than it was. I didn't notice nearly as many of those sudden small spikes in performance drop. So they are going in the right direction. As far as the scene and image quality go, not a bad effort overall. It's nice to see them working on it, but they still can't fully maintain 30 frames per second, as we can see in a couple of dips. So I think a little more work may be required. What I will say is that the load times seem to have slightly increased over the base version of the game. Now, I don't know whether they're loading more assets before you get in so that maybe you experience less popping. I don't really know how that works. Something to do with the level of detail. Perhaps there's some tweaking there because draw distance potentially seems a little improved. Some of you will have caught the absolute roast, which was my review of ONI Quest to be the mightiest ONI, or was it Road to be the mightiest ONI? One of those. And it looked so nice, but it was just such a bad game, down to its repetitive mechanics. But the thing that really irked me was the music. If you don't remember, here's a reminder. The music just didn't fit any of the scenes, and it was just really strange. Now, this has seen a number of patches since then, and every time I go back and check to hear if they've removed that music, and they haven't, look, and I don't think they need to take out music because one person didn't like it. But what I have noticed is a few tweaks to what you can do as the player. So you can actually reduce the background music independent of the sound effects now, which is nice. I'm sure in the base version it was all tied into one setting. They've squashed a load of bugs. They've also implemented a couple of gameplay improvements. So there's small eye icons which point to the next place that you need to go to, and it looks and feels a little different to the base version of the game. So I'm not entirely sure what tweaks they've made, but it does feel a little tighter in the combat department. Visual performance is still around about the same. It seemed to have an uncapped frame rate when I reviewed it originally. Now, the one that I was getting excited about at the very start of this video is coming up next. Now, if you weren't aware, Night Dive Studio, who are responsible for some really excellent remasters and revisits of old games, especially on Switch, well, they're being bought out, and whenever I hear that, it just worries me, you know. I think that there's a potential they're going to stop active projects, things like that. But Blade Runner, when it came out, the remaster, it wasn't a remaster at all. In fact, it was worse, I would say, than the original PC release that I played. Why exactly? Well, the improved visuals, they looked blurry. They didn't have that same grainy quality which made the original so good. There were some ridiculous performance problems in terms of controls not working, menus weren't bound to the correct buttons. It just felt so bad to navigate. And I am delighted to say they have done one heck of a patch with Blade Runner version 1.2.1. Now, I'm sure I'll miss some things, but I'm going to hit the key areas. Firstly, it feels like a completely revamped experience on Switch, down to the quality of the menus, the general layout, and the way that things run. There's now a new help section which is shown in the top left corner of the screen, which can be toggled with the X button, and it makes it so much easier, especially when you're navigating some of those menus. There are vast image quality improvements across the board. You can now quick toggle between the original graphics and the new graphics, and this is the big one. I mean, I don't think I'm wrong in saying, look at the original graphics here, and then when we switch over to the new graphics, I think I prefer the original. The new just blurs everything into one, as I say, and you lose a bit of granularity. If we look through a few different areas, and you can see me flicking backwards and forwards between the new and the original, yeah, I'm really pleased that they've included that option, and that's a nice bit of coding to have it quickly accessible like that. You can also now turn the anisotropic filtering on to the different levels, so you can have it completely off. You can have it on linear, I think, and just anisotropic, and you can kind of tweak that to suit your style and what you prefer. Now, I have to say to the developers, you have introduced quite a massive bug into the Switch version, I'm afraid. I didn't want to say this, but you have. There's an audio issue, and you'll get a high-pitched, really horrible sound will come out at random times. I tried to recreate this. Maybe it was because I was flicking back between the two modes, but here's what you're dealing with. And as you can hear, it's happened to me in a number of areas, so that's something you're going to have to fix. There's also no improvement to models. I think this is probably more difficult because it would involve not just applying filters, you'd literally have to remodel characters and redo animations. I'm not really sure how that would work, or if it would work, or if it's necessary, but yeah, you notice it when the backgrounds look sharper and the main characters, well, they look like that, but I'm not too fussed about that, to be honest. It stands out much less when you keep the original graphic settings. Overall though, I'm so happy to see that Night Dive didn't give up on Blade Runner. They have done a lot of work here. Just needs that last little fix to that audio bug that I've experienced, and this will be a really good way to finally play a classic game on Switch. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoy these videos. I really do like making them. I like going back, like giving people a second chance, or a third, or a seventh, and it gives you guys the information you need without you having to do the same. Thanks so much. Do hit all the like and share and all that stuff, and save money on your eShop credit using switchup.gg to buy your vouchers. All that's left to say then, thanks to our patrons and members, and for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!